We begin with breaking news out of London, where one of the UK's most controversial radical preachers has been sentenced to 5.5 years imprisonment for inviting support for Daesh. Anjem Choudary has been linked to dozens of terror suspects. He was convicted by a UK court last month. Well, for the latest on this, let's go to Miriam Francois, who is outside the Old Bailey in London. Miriam, good to see you. Now, you've met Anjem Choudary and been following this case closely for quite some time. Now, he's been convicted of inviting support for Daesh. What concrete evidence was presented for this charge to reach a conviction?
Well, we heard today from the judge sentencing Anjem Choudary and one of his colleagues that the evidence in this case was very much focused on one very specific crime, and that was a charge of support for a prescribed organization, in this case Daesh. Under the Terrorism Act 2000, it is an offence in the UK to invite support for a terrorist organization, and so it was on that basis that the judge today gave his sentence of 5.5 years. Now, he made 4 very important points in the court today with regards to the sentencing, which could have been a maximum of 10 years, bearing in mind that Anjem Choudary is a very controversial figure here in the UK who has been preaching messages of hate and division for almost 2 decades. So many people here will be questioning whether the sentence itself isn't light relative to the amount of time he has been preaching that. But the judge made clear that this verdict, this sentence today, was relative to one specific crime. He also said that in taking into consideration the sentencing, he looked at the timing of the oath that was made. It was made at a time when Daesh had announced that it was an Islamic state. It was claiming a caliphate. He also pointed out that Anjem Choudary has high standing in the eyes of a number of his followers, and as such was able to influence a significant number of people. And so the size of the audience reached by Anjem Choudary was another factor in the judge's decision. Finally, he also looked at the likelihood that Anjem Choudary would be able to influence an impressionable audience. And so he made clear that while there was no direct link found between the words of Anjem Choudary and direct acts of violence, that the indirect link was, in his words, still a serious one. And that was what led the judge today to pronounce a sentence of 5.5 years with a 15-year notification order for both men involved.
Well, both of these men are significant individuals to counter-terrorism policing and also the security and intelligence agencies. Both men were preaching hate and extremism across communities, and they were also encouraging others to join terrorist organisations both here and overseas. So the sentence today, I think, is a credit to both counter-terrorism policing and our security service partners in relation to not just keeping people safe here in communities across the country, but also bringing these offenders to justice.
Miriam, as you suggested, Anjem Choudary was a very controversial figure, and some would say also quite divisive, including within the Muslim people who are living in the UK as well. What do you see the response of the British public being?
I think a lot of people will be surprised at the sentencing. Of course, because of Anjem Chowdary's high-profile, the high-profile nature of his personality, many people were expecting, I think, a very stiff sentence. As I said earlier, his crime carried a maximum sentence of 10 years. He has been sentenced today to 5.5 years, bearing in mind that he will that time will be deducted for the time he has already spent in police custody. Bearing in mind also the fact that many people in this country regard him as one of the most influential figures in recruiting individuals to the Daesh network in Syria, in Iraq. The question will be to what extent will the fact that he will be in prison for what in likelihood will now be a couple of years what impact will that truly have on his ability to continue to preach hatred? And there are concerns, of course, raised, including by the judge himself, about the ability of Anjem Choudary to continue to espouse messages of hatred from prison. And that is something that there has been some pressure on the prison authorities to keep Mr. Choudary in some form of solitary confinement to avoid his ability to influence those around him.
Miriam Francois in London, thanks so much for your insight.